Hey, Emma.
Yes, Mel.
What do you call a classic but sort of overlooked PlayStation 1 RPG that's about kind of buttoned up, uptight female school teachers?
I don't know. What do you call it?
Wild Marms. Hello and welcome to Talk This.
It's dangerous to podcast alone.
I'm your thrown out of town for having a water pistol host, Madelyn.
I'm your hungry host, Emma.
I should have done that. That would have been better. Thank you for tuning in to this week's show. This week, we are talking about Wild Arms. Alas, not its overlooked spin-off.
I would play Wild Marms, I have to say.
Yeah. It'd be good.
I think it's good.
They'd, hit you with a ruler.
Yeah.
That sort of thing.
Yeah.
Blackboard stuff. Lots to do. So, Wild Arms and Fear and Hunger 2, Termina. So, already anticipating... Well, I guess we'll talk about whether Fear and Hunger is, exactly an RPG. But anticipating some of the classic, these games are slightly too similar, mashup energy.
What? Because they both have turn-based
battles,
combat?
yeah.
That's not enough, Malin, to make that the excuse.
I'm nervous.
Okay.
I'm nervous.
All right.
I was just... you're right. Western, but make it absolutely disturbing.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's talk about Wild Arms.
Tell us about Wild Arms, Malin.
So, Wild Arms is an RPG from Japanese company Mediavision, which was released in 1996 in Japan, and then for the PlayStation 1, as you may have picked up from my very funny joke.
Mm-hmm.
And then came out here in 1997, and in Europe in 1998. And it's a, very, very classic style role-playing game.
Yes. Sony at the time, which you may be able to tell from other games released around this time period, was very interested in 3D. And so basically commissioned, what was it, Mediavision, right?
Yep.
Commissioned Mediavision to make a game that utilized 3D, essentially. So the first Wild Arms, while the overworld, where you're moving through the dungeons, the characters are 2D and the environments are 2D, in combat, it switches to 3D models. Little, funny little blocky guy.
It feels
3D
very
models.
Monster Rancher in playing it. I was like, these are little Monster Rancher characters.
That's fair.
Persona might be the better reference, but to me, it felt very Monster Rancher.
Sure.
I did play a little bit of Wild Arms. It is semi-recently, in the past year or so, on the PlayStation Network for PlayStation 4 and PlayStation 5. I think it was somewhat hard to play for a number of years.
Yes. I think all of them were. But they added it, you can purchase it separately, but they added 1, 2, and 3 to the, what is it, the top one called? You get access to the Classics collection, but that's not actually what the...
Premium, I think.
Yeah, okay. So yeah, it's plus, extra, and then premium, I think. Yeah, so if you get PS Premium, you can play Wild Arms 1, 2, and 3 for free via that subscription service. Or it's 1 and 2 are $10, and 3 is $15.
I have studiously refused to do the math on if I would save money by subscribing. They're
upping the
I know
annual fee at least for the premium, I believe. So.
Well, they did offer me the opportunity to upgrade my subscription when I purchased Wild Arms for $10.
Right. Yeah.
And as always, I said no. but every time I'm I should probably sit down and do the math on this.
I don't think Premium has enough content on it yet to really be worth anything.
I'm not saying it's Game Pass. I'm just saying for me specifically.
Yeah, for you specifically. Still.
I guess. I don't know.
They really do not have that much stuff on Premium.
I know that. But I do feel at least a few times a year, it's there's a game for the podcast that's on the service.
Yeah.
And I do sometimes wonder, since I'm already paying for Plus, how close I would be. You know what I mean? Anyway, Wild Arms is on there if you're already a premium subscriber, or if you're over there creating your tally sheet of games that would make it worth it for you to subscribe. Yeah. Like me. This episode brought to you by PlayStation Plus.
It sort of sucks.
Anyway, I did play the first little bit of this game, not a ton of it, because as you might have, maybe you've picked up from my distant, quiet voice as I refuse to sit close enough to the microphone for editor Emma. It's an in-person talk this.
Yeah.
Woo! Party.
Party indeed.
Party. But that means that I didn't have as much time to play it as I might have otherwise. But I did get it. I did play a little bit of it. It's very classic turn-based RPG of this era. Random enemy encounters. Is there even a hit points bar? Sort of unclear. I haven't figured out if it is. So far, pretty basic attacks. Monsters. But Wild Arms comes with a distinctly Western flavor.
Yes.
By which I mean Western, not Western.
Yes, as in the capital W. Well, I guess they're both that way.
Yeah. Like John Wayne.
Like John Wayne. Exactly. That is the thing that does make Wild Arms as a series stand out from a lot of its contemporaries is this is not the exact setting you see in a lot of just video games in general. And especially in RPGs and RPGs coming out of Japan at the time, you would get a lot of, steampunk or high fantasy or whatever. And not a lot of rootin' tootin'.
And to be clear, you are still fighting more or less high fantasy monsters here, at least so far in my experience.
I read in one retrospective that Wild Arms the first one does hew closer to more traditional fantasy stuff, and then it becomes more and more sort of Wild Westy as the games continue.
So in Wild Arms, you're like a dream chaser, which is what they call people who go out and do fun stuff.
Yeah,
basically. Whose a real name is apparently, it's a group. There's like three main characters. I've only played so far as the guy who is apparently named Rudy, who I named McHoney.
Why McHoney?
I was just trying to think of like what sort of semi-demeaning nicknames.
Semi-demeaning?
Like, or diminutive, maybe.
Okay.
It, like, I don't know. I was like, which ones have I already done? Like, I've already done Champ, I've already done Buddy, I've already done Pal. And I wasted some of those, frankly, on games. Like, I feel like McBuddy and McPal might be able to come back, but it didn't feel right.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, McSport, but then I felt like it wouldn't I wouldn't...
Yeah, it's missing something. Yeah. I see. So McHoney, indeed.
He was a youth, you know?
He is a youth. That's true.
So we went with McHoney. I think. I was sort of doubting myself. I was like, is that actually what I chose? But I'm pretty sure I picked McHoney.
Okay.
So we'll find out. I'll report back on 6 Weeks in Gaming if that was the actual name or if I ultimately chose something else.
I will wait in suspense.
I don't know if am I going to get to name the other three characters? If so, a lot of mix coming our way. I have done Dude McChamp for something. Never mind.
Okay.
McPoke.
Get back on track, Bob.
Sorry.
On track.
I like to talk about my nicknames. McDonald, no, haven't done that one. Anyway, you play as Rudy, sure, Jack and Cecilia, who are all dream chasers, and you're in this world called Gilgaia, and you gotta save that world. And in this world, there's like humans, and both the humans and the elves have different names than this, right? It's very much we can't call zombies sort of situation.
I think Elwu is really funny, personally.
It is kind of funny.
It's spelled ELW, but as I was assured in a few videos, it's pronounced Elwu.
Which is quite funny.
It is quite funny.
I think the zombie game should take that too.
Zomboos.
It would kind of undercut the seriousness. But in this world, so it's like, you all meet each other, like, you gotta save the world from demons, right? Like, that's the story.
Also, I thought it was Phil Gaia.
Did I say Gilgaia?
Yeah.
I think I mistyped it somewhere. It is Phil Gaia. I have Gil Gaia up here and Phil Gaia down here, and Gil Gaia sounded weird.
Yeah.
When I said it.
The world in all of Wild Arms, all the different Wild Arms
Always
games,
Phil
it's
Gaia.
always called Phil Gaia, but it is often distinctly different from each other. There's not really the continuity of Phil Gaia. There's a bunch of different Phil Gaias.
You'll sometimes see recurring characters. I was seeing something about like a dragon that appears in multiple of them, but the geography of the world does not seem to hold constant.
No.
Anyway, in Phil Gaia, at least in Wild Arms 1, I can't speak to the rest of the Wild Arms, but there were these like robots from space who came, who were called Metal something, but I can't, Metal Demons, duh, obviously Metal Demons.
What else would you call them?
I know. So they came from space, right? And to defeat these metal demons from space, they basically invented the gun. But they also, which they call arms.
Yes.
Something.
Ancient relic machines.
Something.
Sure.
And those did drive off the metal demons, but also kind of destroyed the world. And now people don't like guns.
Yeah.
But you've got one.
Yep.
And thus our story begins.
Yeah. So you've just played through, like, I believe it starts with, like, a prologue for each of the 3 main characters before you all meet up?
So here's the deal. I played through Chapter 1, it doesn't call it Chapter 1, but Chapter 1 of McHoney, Rudy. But then it, like, gave me an option to choose again, and I chose Rudy again.
Oh.
So, but I'm a little lost, frankly. I'm just running around a gigantic town. Unbelievably large town that I'm in right now.
I love a good big town.
Where based on, I try not to spoil myself too much, but based on the beginning story synopsis, I seem to want to meet these other 3 characters in this town.
2, right?
I'm sorry, other 2 characters, 3 characters total, in this town. But if I haven't played them, how are they going to get here?
Well, they'll probably already be there. You just won't have seen their prologue
I hope
yet.
I haven't messed things up for myself.
Well, we'll have you report back.
Another one, it's not 3-player co-op, but in the storied history of 3-player RPGs, 3-character RPGs.
What are the examples you're thinking of there?
Secret of Mana. Trine.
Trine. Classic installment Trine.
I just feel like 3 is a weird number of characters, and for there to be so many games with 3.
Yeah, well, it is actually somewhat notable because a lot of RPGs will have a large number of characters.
Yeah.
Whereas this is like, you've got 3. Oh, Skies of, what was the Sky Pirate one? Skies of Arcadia?
That's what I wanted to say. Yeah.
That's the 3-person one.
See? It's just interesting, because 3 feels like a weird, I think of 4 as the number. And so whenever there's a 3, I'm like, oh, it's a good one.
3. Classic 3.
Classic 3. It does in the, they released a sort of like updated, extended, awesome remake.
Alter F, yes.
Alter F a few years later, where you do get more characters to play as.
I see.
Apparently.
Interesting.
Yeah, I know. Wild Arms is, I have to call this out, because it's like every old game we talk about now. Right, but Wild Games is yet another one in the long canon of got pretty regular games in the 90s and early aughts.
Yeah.
And then nothing.
Yeah.
A mobile game? And then nothing.
Well, it seems like Sony tasked MediaVision. They picked up the Valkyria Chronicles series from the original developers. And like the Shining series, which is another like niche project as well. So they kept this company busy for a while, but they didn't want them to make more Wild Arms.
But see, now that they've released this game to be playable, I'm sure there's people out there with hope.
Well, if you didn't write it down, the original creator...
Oh, I did write it down. Go on.
Akifumi Kaneda?
I didn't write down the name.
Akifumi Kaneko, who has spent most of the time since not making Wild Arms working on the Symphogear anime series, which I've heard is delightful. It's about girls who punch people real hard and also sing while punching people real hard.
Cool.
So that seems great. But he launched a double Kickstarter with another... I can't remember who the other creator is or what his classic series was, but he and another developer, director, and their teams launched a double Kickstarter where they were pitching 2 different games. I also cannot remember what the other game was called, but it's not about that. So
that's not the game we're talking about.
That's not the game we're talking about. But they had it so funding was going to, there's like a main funding goal that went towards both of them, and then each one got their own like little stretch goals based on who was donating to each game.
Incentive thing, yeah.
Yes. So the one from Kaneko, just said his name.
That was right.
Kaneko, is Armed Fantasia, which is basically just a modernized version of Wild Arms. It's not related to Wild Arms. It is a different world and things are different, but it's Wild West themed. They have arms, although the acronym stands for something else in Armed Fantasia.
Like, to be clear, arms being the weapon.
Yes, arms being the
weapon. Limbs are going to come up in the second half of this episode, but...
no, the capital ARM.
Yeah.
But they do not stand for Ancient Relic Machines. Yeah. They stand for something else. 3 characters that you play as and wander around. Some whistling in the soundtrack.
Oh, wow.
So that was one of the stretch goals, was like extra whistling, which I thought was very funny.
So the original Wild Arms, and again, maybe other ones. I stuck with the original on this one. Opens with an anime cinematic from Madhouse.
Yes.
That features some iconic, very, Western-y style kind of whistling over the soundtrack.
Yes. Some fun synergy with that is likely one of the big inspirations for Wild Arms was the manga series Trigun, which had started releasing at the beginning of 1995, and then this came out like at the end of 1996. Mm-hmm. Trigun is like a Western-themed sci-fi adventure. And then I think just a year later 2 years later in 1998, Madhouse would do the original Trigun anime. So clearly they did this opening. We're like, hell yeah, I love a cowboy.
You got it, cowboy. So Wild Arms was a successful game. Was particularly successful in Japan, and sort of moderately successful in the States, where it was one of the first RPGs for Sony to decide there could potentially be a market for.
Yes.
In the West. But of course, it sort of got eaten alive and out-hyped by the upcoming Final Fantasy VII.
Yes.
And not even just in retrospect. Like, it was so interesting to me to, look at some of this stuff. It was, even at the time, and the reviews were like, well, this is cool, but I'm sort of just waiting for Final Fantasy VII. And I was like, man... It's always been like that, huh?
It's always been like that. It also, Wild Arms 2, which I think is unfortunately still the case with the re-release on PS4, or PS5, whatever
it
technically is. You can play it on both. I don't know what it technically is. But Wild Arms 2 has a very stilted translation that makes it sort of hard to follow and also hard to emotionally invest in. So I watched a lot of retrospectives that were like, it's really interesting, but if you're playing it with the original English translation, it's really hard to get past that they all talk like robots in English.
Which, by the way, someone being a robot is a key part of the first one. So somebody on the translation team was just a little confused.
That must be it.
Yeah. There's also a talking mouse. I feel like I ought to really try to sell this game for folks. So if robots, talking mice, gun control are topics that interest you.
Yes.
Because, right there in the prologue, you save a child from a zombie, which we do not call a zomboo.
Darn.
And then they go, you saved him with a gun. And so this game is, in fact, about a good guy with a gun. It's a little troubling. Let me think about it that way.
Yeah, sure. And then Wild Arms 3 moved into cel-shaded graphics, so it is probably the best looking of the ones that are currently available. Has a better translation, but seemed to have lost the die-hard fans, and so despite getting better reviews from people more new to it or critics, it seemed to have just lost the appeal that it had for whatever reason. And then Wild Arms 4 and 5 are apparently much more radical departures for the series. I didn't look into those very much, but
you can't play them.
You can't play them.
And 5 came out in 2006.
Yeah.
For context.
Yeah.
So, and then there was some kind of handheld game maybe a few years after that or around there for the PSP, and they had a gacha game that was out for a couple of years from 2018 to 2020, and then shut down. And Wild Arms is one of the games that's featured on the PlayStation Classic.
In Japan.
No, I think in the US.
I read that it did not sell enough copies to be put in that line.
Hits. Interesting.
For the US, but it did for both classics and greatest hits in Japan.
Well, I knew it sold more in Japan, but I feel like I was seeing reviews on US-based sites that talked it. I'm sure you're right.
I don't know. That's what my source said, I guess.
It was confusing to me because at least one that I read was Ark the Lad is only in Japan. And then it talked about Wild Hearts separately. Not Wild Hearts. That's a totally different game.
We talked about that game, too.
Wild Arms separately. It does make a funny parallel with Final Fantasy VII, right? Where in this game they're you have one magic gun. You cannot be in our town ever again. And Barrett has an arm.
Yeah.
A literal wild arm.
A gun arm, yeah. A wild arm.
Literally.
It is a pretty wild arm.
Very wild arm. So I'm maybe gonna continue this. I don't know. I have a few. I need to clean up my game lineup just a little bit.
It's been on my I'd like to check this out list for a while, although I might jump to Wild Arms 3 and start there and see what that's about.
I did read that the combat system takes 2/3 of the game to really click in, but that's okay. So far I'm just okay, we mash attack. Every once in a while we shoot our gun.
Yeah.
And that's okay.
Yeah.
I don't mind that. So speaking of games with combat systems, turn-based combat systems.
Yeah.
Fear and Hunger 2, Termina. I wrote in my first notes here deep cut, even though it's not. It's had a little bit of a YouTube moment, streaming moment.
Yeah.
Fear and Hunger. But I did have to go to Russian Wikipedia.
Yeah, it doesn't have a English Wikipedia page for whatever reason. You'd think at this point someone would have made one, at least for the first game, but
it does feel like once there are... I saw at least 2 YouTube videos with over 1 million views about this game. It feels like that's enough for a Wikipedia page to me.
Yeah, I don't really know what caused this game to get picked up by the sort of YouTube streaming scene exactly. But it's one of those games that I saw art cropping up for across my Twitter timeline just sort of randomly one day, and then I looked into it. I was like, oh, 2 is out, and so I added it to the list.
I was going to ask you, because when I was there's no Wikipedia page, I was how did I even find this?
The art on my Twitter, basically. Yeah, I mean,
I watched, Emma couldn't stomach it, but I watched this Eye Patch Wolf video.
I'm sure he's a fine person. Something about Super Eye Patch Wolf's videos, I can't do them. That's all.
I loved that lead in with, I'm sure he's a fine person, which just felt so loaded. You weren't I'm sure some people like this. You're I'm sure that he's okay. But anyway, I watched that video. And in the beginning of it, he does sort of show the traffic on it. And it's
the Google.
Weirdly in fall 2022, it picks up.
Yeah.
Which is how it can go with these indie games, right? You just need one big person to stream it, and then
yeah, absolutely.
You've made your money. It's kind of crazy. Anyway, it's literally made in RPG Maker by one Finnish guy.
Yeah, that is actually not surprising to me at all.
Sure.
it very much has, despite all the things that make it stand out, at its core, it feels very much in the RPG Maker horror game tradition. For what it's worth.
Yeah. The long tradition.
It is a long
No,
tradition. But yeah, it has all of the things that are interesting and that turn me off about those types of games. Just in a different sort of form, I guess.
Yeah, it's from Finnish developer Miro Haverinen.
Yes.
Which, this feels like the kind of game that should have some, like, well, I don't know. I guess it's, like, spoiler, it's, like, kind of gross and disturbing,
yes.
The original.
And the second one.
But the original, like, especially. But it feels like the kind of game that should have, like, a good, like, polygon interview with the guy.
There was at least one blog that did have an interview with them. Which apparently it started out as just like sort of like a tabletop RPG, sort of just like an improv exercise that they did. I'm not actually sure the gender, so that's why I'm using they. Just because I don't know.
Yeah, never mind.
But they would do it with they would do just like thought exercises with their friends, and then it ended up becoming sort of a game. They actually talked about like they tried to make indie games for a while, and gave it up. They're making their own games, and then they decided like I can't do it. Like this is too much work for what it is. And right when they did that, the indie game scene like exploded. And they were like, maybe that wasn't the best decision at the time. But eventually they came back and made Fear and Hunger, which they say if you want to make indie games, maybe don't want to have hobbies.
That has to be the hobby.
Yeah, that has to be your hobby, is making your indie game.
Fandom suggests that he uses he/him pronouns.
Okay.
For whatever that's worth. Doesn't surprise me given the amount of just genitalia out there.
Girls can put in the genitalia.
I know they can, but
girls can have appreciation of the horrors of the genitals.
You're so right. But also.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
Anyway, the original came out in sort of like late 2018 for computers, which again is like so telling, right? That it's like, oh, there was like this game was just sort of like floating out there for 4 years.
Yeah.
And then just randomly, even to say that it blew up is probably kind of like overselling it just a little bit, but like certainly blew up relative to what you would expect from your random RPG Maker brutally hard game sitting on Steam. Although it must have done well enough that like they wanted to make a sequel, because the sequel came out this past December, which of course there was certainly not enough time for the game to kind of blow up to then make the sequel in this month and a half or whatever. It's the kind of game that when I look at, like, I'm sure it sucks to play.
Yeah. I
was like watching the video, like Eye of Patch Wolf kind of sold me on it a little bit. I was like, this this would be fun. But I know that I have to know that I would hate this.
Yeah.
And I say that with like, I think it's very successful at what it's doing here. It seems to be very successful at what it's doing here, but I often don't do well with the like, oh, I feel like I have to do something over and over, or oh, I figured something out, but I still have to do it over and over. And that feels very core to this.
It's sort of, I mean, in some ways, this is not a game you want to play with people because it's sort of effed up.
Yeah.
But also, and he does in the interview I read, like say that the Souls games were a big inspiration. In the same way as Souls games, I can see some fun in like playing it with a group of friends and dying a lot and sucking real bad.
Yeah.
And that there's sort of a fun to be had in that. Or in that case, I'm pretty sure like Super iPad Wolf and other people like streaming it with the right audience could also be fun in its own way.
Absolutely.
But perhaps playing it by yourself, unless you're that person who enjoys that, it might not be as fun.
No, it doesn't surprise me as a game that had the potential to blow up. Because it's definitely like a, both in sort of mixing it's fun to watch somebody play a horror game, survival horror game, and it's fun to watch somebody play a roguelike.
Yeah.
And it's fun to watch somebody be really bad at things.
Yes.
Kind of like perfect storm. So I'm talking very much a lot here about sort of like the original Fear and Hunger. And that's because, like, again, it not having a Wikipedia page is really, I feel like, representative of the, like, lack of written content about this game on the internet. Outside of, like, Reddit.
There was a Polygon article about the first one, I believe.
I couldn't find it. I searched Fear and Hunger 2, Polygon.
The first one.
I searched Fear and Hunger, Polygon.
Okay, well, it was on some site I recognized, at least. Maybe it wasn't Polygon. But if you are interested in this series, but you say, like, oh, man, this seems like a lot, my impression from watching videos on Fear and Hunger 2, reviews and stuff, is that it is a more accessible version of the game. It's a little friendlier. There are saves throughout it, not constant saves, but somewhat saves, and ways to get more saves if you want them. And it is just generally a little less unforgiving and also a little less disturbing in some cases. So if you're interested in this, you might want to start with 2. If you're not, like, immediately like, oh yeah, that sounds like my bag is like dying in horrible ways. Hell yeah. It's just generally seems like most of the reviews were like, it's Fear and Hunger, but they've made it a little bit more streamlined. And then if you really want to, you can put on the mod that allows you to, like, bookmark, so that you don't have to play big sessions all at once.
Yeah.
Without, like, you can't reload your bookmark, right? You can just use it for that time so that you can go eat dinner or something, you know.
Love to eat dinner.
Love to eat dinner.
In both of these games, yeah, you know, like we said, it is sort of a turn-based RPG combat style.
Yes.
Now, whether you should be playing this like a turn-based RPG, the answer seems to be no.
Well, the first game seems to be no. Combat's a bit more viable in the second game.
Still, you still probably shouldn't be playing it like I'm playing Wild Arms.
Yes.
Which is, I punchy punch.
Yes.
Sometimes I use my gun.
One fundamental difference, I believe, between the first one and the second one is the second one does offer you ways to level up.
Ah.
So why don't you give us the sort of plot for the second one here, the setup of it.
So in the second one, you're on a train. There's 14 train passengers. You can play as 8 of them, who I presume have, like, different stats and different skills, because that's a thing in the first game too. And you've been forced by the trickster moon god to participate in Termina, Festival of Termina, which is like a battle royale thing. Only one of you is gonna live. And so this takes place over 3 days. They have, like, time segments, and everyone is sort of running around doing their own thing, dying or not dying.
Yes.
So Evil Train.
Yes, Evil Train. So yeah, the start of the game, and apparently there's some back and forth on whether the developers actually said this, and I couldn't find where he had or hadn't said this, but there's some talk that all the 14 characters on the train will be playable at some point. He apparently had his hard drive crashed, and he lost a lot of progress on one of the updates back in, like, April or something, so...
That's horrible. That itself feels...
Fear and Hungry.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that may or may not be coming along with other additions. He did show a video of the fishing minigame. So
thank God.
Thank God. That's coming.
Just spoiler, in the first one, I do not think you can pet the dogs that rip you apart repeatedly at the beginning.
No.
I don't think they're pettable.
No, I don't think they're pettable. But you can pick any one of the 8 currently playable characters, and you go through like a short text adventure while you're on the train where you sort of shape that character's background slightly. So you go through like their history, and occasionally there are choices that can shape a little bit differently of what this character's history is. And then you play as that character throughout the game, but also the other passengers are going around doing their own thing in the village. So like you said, it's split into different times of day across the 3 days. And if you go to an area like on your first try through at like a certain time, and then go to it at a different time on your second try through, you'll notice that things change in different areas based on what the other survivors are doing, what you've done, what enemies are there, so on and so forth. But the way that you level up, I believe, is if you fight an enemy and then saw off their head, when you go to sleep. When you go to sleep, you can go to the Hexen, I think it is, and offer those heads to like level up your skills, essentially. I believe this is just for the character that you are playing as. In both games, you can gather a party. So in this one, you can recruit like some of the other passengers of the train, and so you can have more filled out party than just you in combat and for doing things. But I don't think you can level up your party with your heads. I think it's just for you.
Mm-hmm. That is interesting. I mean, it definitely points to combat being something that's less to be, like, avoided at all costs than it seems to be in the first game.
However, you still can, in the second game, if you go to a toilet, it does say, jump down? And as in the video that I was watching, he was like, yeah, I played a video game. You jump down there. There's some sort of underground passage. No.
Just a room.
It's just a room, and you cannot climb back up. So...
Gotta reset.
You gotta reload your save.
Anyway, again, cannot emphasize enough though that these games are like very difficult, right? They are built to be very difficult. As Emma hinted at, it's an RPG, but it's not just like an RPG where it's like, oh, they have 100 hit points and they have 1 attack turn. Like enemies have limbs, arms, you might even say.
Yes.
And so there's a strategy to, okay, do you go straight for the head because you take the head off, you kill it?
Yeah.
Or do you need to weaken it by taking off some of its limbs first to make it possible to get to the head?
Yes.
So that's really difficult, and they do a lot of damage, and you're gonna die a lot.
Yes. And they can also take, in some cases, your arms.
Yes, you also have limbs.
Yes.
Arms. And so, yeah, like, you're gonna die a lot. It's, in addition to being, like, turn-paced, it's definitely a roguelike. It's definitely a survival horror, because it's scary.
Yes. It is funny. So in the second game, you start off, you have this, like, strange dream. In the dream, you may or may not lose your legs. You don't lose them in reality, but... I was reading something that's like, they have like a really like terrible reaction to like losing their legs in the dream, but like they can just saw off their limbs whenever they want in the village, and they're fine. They seem fine with it, honestly.
Yikes. Yikes.
But there are things like you have to be careful, like if you're bleeding, that can affect you. You could get an infection.
You have a mental health bar.
Yes, you have a mental health bar. In the second game, depending on the character you pick, you might have unique challenges or different ways that they interact with the world. There's one character that's in a wheelchair, for example, so that affects how she is able to deal with different terrain.
Yeah.
There's one character that I believe, if you can end up with this if you play as him, if you pick like the choices in the background, or he has this by default if you don't play as him, but he has like a cocaine addiction that affects him throughout the game and affects how he plays, essentially.
Yeah.
Those are the 2 examples that I saw that were most notable to me. But
so hopefully the cocaine addiction gives you an idea of the kind of content that you might encounter playing this game. I'll have to say that too, right? Like if you're listening to this and being like, I like roguelikes, I like games. This game is like in some ways a good example of like, oh, sometimes you can like break a lot of rules and people still really like it.
Yeah.
Right? Like, this is a game that has a lot of things that if you died in these ways or encountered these fights in the context of a different game, it'd be like, oh, this is unfair.
Yes.
But people, for whatever reason, seem to have really latched on to really enjoying the particular type of unfairness of this game.
Yeah.
Which is just like, man, like that's not really something you can ever predict, is it?
Yeah. Well, I did think I got to the point in that Super Eye Patch Wolf video where he did say it feels like it plays a little bit more like an immersive sim than an RPG, in that there are multiple different ways that you can approach a problem as opposed to just entering the turn-based combat scenario. So, like, putting down a bear trap, which in the first game can really get you.
Yeah.
It's not like Leon Resident Evil 4 where he's just like, oh, that bruised. He's just like, you lose both your legs instantly if you walk into a bear trap in the first game. And then you just don't have legs for the rest of the time.
Crawl.
But if you pick up a bear trap, you can also leave it and the enemy can walk into it and lose their legs, and then you can go in and hit their head immediately in combat. Or you can pick up different potions that you can use that will affect them, or like you can just go for the head, or you can whittle them down. Like there's different solutions that you can find to the problem beyond just like, I leveled up and now I'm stronger and I punch him harder, essentially.
So again, but like that though, like very hard.
Yes.
I'm having to say this to myself, even though I don't think I can play it. It did say the first one came out for Mac. It did come out for Mac. I'm a little scared of that. There is a part of my brain lately. I'm having to remind myself that like Hades 2 is coming.
Yeah.
Right? But I'm like, oh, but I never played Hades. And then I'm like, Madelyn, you watched like 200 hours.
You could play Hades if you wanted to.
I have so many games. I can't play a game that I spent like 2 solid months watching happen. Anyway, it'll be interesting. It's just interesting to me that like this is like a real cult game. I feel like sometimes we talk about like kind of cult classic games now, and it's like, oh, but like those aren't real now. Like when it's a cult, like Hades, right? Hades, I'm sure, had it done like not quite as unbelievably well as it done, would have been like, oh, that's a cult classic.
Sure.
And I think still will maybe be like, oh, it's a cult classic because it's not from a true AAA studio.
Yeah.
But this is like a real cult. I mean, it's probably too soon to call it a classic, but a real cult hit.
Yes. But yeah, as we've sort of talked around, the other thing that makes Fear and Hunger sort of hard to get through is it does have a lot of disturbing content.
Of like any type.
Yeah. I mean, it is in sort of the RPG Maker style, so it is not like graphic. You know, it's not like
wildly realistic.
Yeah, it's
perhaps.
not graphic. It's not. It's you know, like Mortal Kombat original, not Mortal Kombat modern.
Yeah.
Maybe a little bit in terms of like how it is rendered, I guess. Mm-hmm. But there's a lot of, as we said, violence. You can cut off your limbs. You can get your limbs cut off. You can get crucified. You can get disemboweled. There's lots of genitalia. There's lots of, there's not necessarily lots of, but there is sexual assault or implied sexual assault. There's whatever you can imagine, essentially. Yeah, it's probably there somewhere. So if that's something that you feel like you are sensitive to, then you probably want to look up specific content warnings for these games as well before going into them.
There is I mean, this is not good enough for that. There is like a sensitivity setting of some kind, because I think for this to be a successful game for streamers, some of this content has to be able to be excised or blurred.
I'm not sure if that's official or if there is a censor mod for them.
Okay, never mind. Well, either way, there are things out there where if the only thing that's going to bother, if you're only at the level of, I don't know if I want to be looking at a penis the entire time that I play this game, right? There are probably ways to get around that.
Yes.
There are likely not ways to get around, like, allusions to a lot of these things
Yes.
happening, or like your legs being cut off.
Yes.
Frankly, that will happen
Yes.
to you.
Yes. Probably at least once.
Probably many times. If anything I've read about this game is an indication. But hey, you know, the single developer game that broke out. I hope he made some money.
Hopefully. Fear and Hunger 2 also right now only has, well, it has functionally 3 endings, one of which is somewhat different depending on the character that you are playing. I believe the first one had more like 8 or 9, more. You could also pick the character that you play in the first one, although I don't think that you build out their backstory in the same way as you do.
But they do have different sort of strengths and abilities.
Yeah. So, that's one point of complaint I've seen from the fandom of, like, the endings don't feel, like, conclusive enough. I read some pushback. It's like, you wanted a happy ending? And I was like, no, I don't feel like that's actually what people are asking for. But there's essentially, like, 2 types of ending, and then one of them has, like, 2 sub-routes.
Got it.
And apparently, in some ways, they're not terribly satisfying to go through.
That's
for
tough.
what it's worth.
In a game like this, where it's, I don't know, on one hand, getting to the end sort of has to be its own reward.
Yeah.
Right? Because, like, nothing the story is going to give you is going to make it worth how hard it is to get there.
For what it's worth, in that sort of Souls inspiration way, it is one of those games where you're picking up lore from, like, items around, and then the ending is sort of open-ended and vague in the sort of Soulsian way, but your appreciation for it might be more, depending on how deep you've gone into the lore contained within the game. So there is that to consider. Again, I feel like we talked about this when I talked about Dredge.
Yeah.
When I finished it, I was saying, like, I don't feel like I really get the ones where you have to, like, go around collecting the lore.
Yeah.
And that sort of depends, like, that affects how invested you are in the ending.
Right.
But a lot of people really like that sort of way of building things out, so.
No, all I meant was that, like, this is a really hard game, right? And so you might think to yourself, when I get, like, in life, you might think, I get to the end of something really hard.
Malin.
And I get a reward. A little treat.
Uh-huh.
Right? And of course, like, in a game like this, that's probably a bad way to think about it. Because, like, there's no story reward that could be given to you here that would make it worth the, like, very, very, very hard experience of getting through it. And so, like, your reward has to be just, like, I did it. At which point, like, maybe the reward's going to just be the end. You know?
Yeah.
But...
yeah. Fair enough.
But we gotta have our branching paths.
Yeah.
We have to have them. Is it time to mash?
I think it may be time to mash.
Okay. So, like, the obvious thing is to do just, like a Western on a locomotive sort of RPG.
Yeah.
That is, like, the beginning of Final Fantasy VII, isn't it? You're on a train.
It's not there's nothing Western.
No, Barrett's like Tifa wears, like, cowboy hat.
She does have one cowboy outfit, you're right. I don't think that makes it into a Wild Western themed game.
Yet. Mod
you know
some
what?
chaps onto Cloud and we're there.
You know what? You're not wrong. No, but I think you could do something where, like, you're on some sort of train, like, maybe like a hijacked train?
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm thinking, I don't really know how you would bring in, like, your sort of different, like, I think it would have to have, like, more survival meters.
Yeah. Couldn't just be hit points and mana, for sure.
Like hungry, sad, whatever you want to call those. Hungry, sad. Because I believe in the first game, and then the second game doesn't really address this, but don't worry about it, is, like, in the first game, you're getting really hungry because you're in, like, the dungeon of fear and hunger.
Yeah.
In the second game, you also can like starve to death in like a day, which isn't really how that works, but that's okay.
Alternate universe. It's fine. It's fine.
You're right. It is. We didn't even get into it. It is set in like an alternate universe.
Yeah.
But no point getting into that.
Doesn't really matter.
It doesn't really matter.
Okay, so like, yeah, train RPG.
Mm-hmm.
I do think, like, in some ways, and again, I realize that I'm always setting too high of a standard for me, these mashups. We're not bringing in very much of Fear and Hunger.
Well, okay, so you start on a train.
Okay.
It gets hijacked.
Okay.
Perhaps there's some sort of opening thing with the hijackers, but eventually you get, like, tossed off the train into the middle of nowhere. Right?
Yeah.
The Wild West middle of nowhere.
Yeah, obviously.
Yeah.
Goes
And
without
so
saying.
you have to, like, go around and try to make your way back to civilization. But there's spooky things in the middle of nowhere of the Wild West, you know?
Yeah.
There are, you know, a good number of... I don't think it should be zombies, but there are a good number of, like, zombie, demon, Wild West crossovers.
It's true.
I feel like we could get something there, you know?
Like a Red Dead.
Like
But
a Red
with-
Dead. But with zombies.
Yeah.
Which they've done.
Oops.
But, you know, with... It's not, like, shooty, tooty, Rudy.
Right. We don't like guns.
No, you have a cursed gun. I feel
Oh,
cursed gun.
a cursed gun.
There we go. You got,
That's
like, a
pretty
cursed
good.
gun of
That's
some
pretty
sort.
good. Yeah.
And that has some sort of effect on you, so you
right.
have to
Every
manage
time
your...
you use it, you get hungry.
Yeah, or something to that effect.
Okay. Okay. What's the quest though?
Get back to civilization is your initial
Doesn't
one.
it have to be bigger than that though?
It can become bigger than that.
Okay.
That's how, you know, our traditional 90s RPG works, right? It always starts out with like you've got like small goal, right?
Yeah.
And then it balloons from there. So you have to sort of keep that structure.
Right. I guess I'm saying, okay, give me a teaser. A little taste.
I don't know. You have a cursed gun. Something to do with that.
Okay, yeah. Ultimately, your cursed gun is inhabited by an evil god or something like
Yes,
that,
something
that you have to
something to
kill
that
with
effect.
the cursed gun.
Yes.
Okay.
I do think we abandon the sort of... It has to be a little bit less hostile than
No, this
Fear and
version
Hunger.
for sure. We've taken some Fear and Hunger narrative.
Yes, we're taking the like roguelike part of the Fear and Hunger experience out of it, I think.
Yeah.
You just save like
Yeah.
normal.
No, it's an RPG. No, for sure.
Yeah.
Because we could go the other way with the mashup. We could go fantasy roguelike.
Yeah.
Not as much of that as you would think, is there?
I guess not.
It just doesn't come, I mean, again, not that I'm, like, immersed in the roguelike genre,
Yeah.
but it doesn't come immediately to mind something that is, like JRPG fantasy
Yeah.
roguelike.
Yeah.
So that's not really an adequate mashup to say JRPG roguelike, to be honest. Like, roguelike in a classic RPG fantasy town, but I'll put out there, there's probably a market for that.
Yeah.
It's not a good mashup, but there's probably a market.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, I like Cursed Gun. That's probably the name of the game. Cursed Gun.
I don't think that should be the name of the game. That doesn't have good SEO.
You're right.
We
Like,
come up with something else.
Cursed Gun Intelligence.
Cursed Gun Intelligence?
CGI.
No.
Um,
We just have to get a fancier synonym for cursed, I think.
you're right. Twisted. Twisted Metal.
Twisted Metal. We got it. We figured it out.
We did it.
Somebody get Anthony Mackie on the phone.
Do I have a pitch? You know, Anthony Mackie probably be pretty good in this,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, sure.
Western guy in the look. If the Western guy can't look like John Wayne.
I'm trying to remember. I watched The Harder They Fall or something. I don't think Anthony Mackie is in that. I'm trying to remember if he is. It's a black Western. I don't think Anthony Mackie is one of the characters in that.
Yeah. I'm looking it up. No. Fan casting suggests him, but he was not actually cast. No, Anthony Mackie could be in the TV adaptation for sure. For sure.
I'll allow him to be in the we'll allow it.
If he was interested.
Yeah.
If I called him up and said, "Do you want to be in Twisted Metal?"
And he was like, well, "Excuse, I
think
am.
I already am."
You confused?
Well, it's good. I feel like we've come up with something good here.
Blasphemous Revolver.
Blasphemous Revolver isn't bad. I was gonna do Ghouly Undead Nasheen. Gun. We really didn't. We need to figure out how to make the gun acronym.
You're right.
Happen, but there's not like an obvious.
Well,
think about it while I give our outro.
Okay.
Listeners, thank you for tuning in to another episode of Talk This.
It's dangerous to podcast alone.
What do you think about a Western kind of turn-based RPG setup, but with like a bunch of meters? Should Anthony Mackie be in it? Oh, if he's interested. Do you think Wild Arms is overlooked, or did you spend the whole time we were talking about it being like, yeah, but like, what about Final Fantasy VII? If you have thoughts on this or anything else that we talked about this week, you should follow us on social media. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube at Talk This Podcast. You can also visit our website, www.talkthispodcast.com, where you can read all about the show, check out the games in the hat where we're about to pull our next 2 games, and read our blog featuring long-running series Split Screen and Click with Boyfriend. But finally, and perhaps most importantly, if you enjoyed the show, you ought to subscribe. We're on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, TuneIn, Spotify, Pandora Podcasts online and on the app, Overcast, Pocket Cast, wherever you can find podcasts, wherever you found the podcast today. Subscribe to Talk This so you never miss an episode every week. Next week it's Emma's side quest.
We'll see.
I don't have a good. It's not funny when I just say like Autumn Leaves games. I think
You've
I
said
literally
that.
said that last year.
You've said that for like three weeks
games
now.
For the
I
high
feel
holidays.
like yeah.
Like I don't know, right?
Mm-hmm.
Games for when it's really hot, even though it's September.
Yeah.
Anyway, but in 2 weeks, Emma, what are we talking about?
In 2 weeks for our old game, we were talking about Skullgirls.
Oh, interesting, fun.
That'll be one that we
People
talk about.
Don't have feelings about that game.
Nobody has any feelings about Skullgirls. And our new game will be Mask of the Rose.
Nice. I like skulls and masks.
Skulls, girls, roses, and masks. What else do you need?
What else do you need? Maybe a game.
A gun.
A gun. Did you figure it out?
No.
Oh, okay. Well, that's our show. On that disappointing note, that's our show. We'll keep workshopping it. Emma, do you have a...
Get underground now. Bang.
Bang. Bang could be... Because the
Gunba.
last one could be gun.
Gumba?
No. I'm saying bang is the acronym.
Oh, I see.
Being...
Alive. Not good.
Gun. Gun has got to be the G.
Being alive, not gun.
Oh, Emma, sign us off.
This week, I hope that you also chase out anyone in your town who has a gun.